Here's a phone that was quite overshadowed and ignored because it was released a month before the all-new iPhone X in 2017. Yes, this is the almost forgotten iPhone 8. But now the question is it worth buying today? I kinda wanna say yes, because it only cost me $50 for this perfect looking phone with almost no scuffs or cracks on the body. But there's another more depressing reason for that price. Anyways, first let's talk about the design. Now this phone has aluminum edges, a glass back, a tiny 4.7-inch screen with something called Corning glass, a tiny camera on the back, which we will of course come by later on, and a home button which is not exactly a button, but a button-shaped sensor which gives you physical feedback when you press on it, and which also happens to have Touch ID. But now let's wind back to the screen. I've heard from many people that tiny screens on older iPhones are bad, but I kinda wanna disagree on the tiny part, because I think a tiny 4.7-inch screen is actually better to hold and use than the bigger screens on newer iPhones. And now viewing content is not too bad either. Of course, it isn't as good as on the newer iPhones with bigger screens, but it's still not that bad. The only two downsides is that the screen on this iPhone 8 is an IPS LCD display, which isn't as vibrant or saturated as the OLED displays on newer iPhones. And switching from an OLED display to an IPS LCD display isn't very demure or mindful.
And the screen on the iPhone 8 can only reach a max brightness of up to 625 nits. And as you can see, it's gonna be a hard time using this outside. It's now at full brightness and I can barely see anything. But since the inside matters too, we gotta take a look at the hardware.
The iPhone 8 has an A11 Bionic chip, a 1821 mAh battery, which we will talk about later, 2 GB of RAM, and a storage option of just 256 GB, which might not seem like a lot, but it is plenty. Personally, I'm rocking with the 64 GB version, which is more than enough. And by the way, this is also the first iPhone to get a wireless charger, although I wouldn't recommend using wireless charging in general, as it generates more heat and lithium-ion batteries inside the phones doesn't like heat. Now with all this hardware, you can run the iOS 16.7 software. Now it's a bit sad that it doesn't have the newer iOS 17, but this thing was released over 7 years ago, so that's understandable. But anyways, it's time to look at how all this hardware and software make this phone perform in real life. For calling, sending text messages, using social media and browsing, it performs alright. There's no major lag and it can run pretty much every app since it's running on a fairly modern software. However, when it comes to gaming, this phone doesn't do too well. It heats up and the battery drains super fast. But anyways, it's time to look at the camera. The iPhone 8 has a single 12 megapixel camera and it's really good for taking photos in good lighting. Just look at all these pictures. The sharpness, the color balance are great. And I took all of these photos by simply pulling the phone out of my pocket and snapping a quick shot. So the autofocus is fast and accurate too. And just for comparison, I also included the same pictures taken with an iPhone 15 Pro. But in low light, however, it's a different story. Everything generally just looks bad because the phone doesn't have any low light mode. Anyways, on the bright side, the phone can record up to 4K at 60 FPS and the overall video quality looks really nice. It's obviously not as nice as the videos taken with newer iPhones, but I would say it's good enough. But now over to the battery. This phone has a 1821 mAh battery, as I said earlier, which would probably last you one day. But my iPhone 8 has only 76% of the battery capacity left, or in other words, this phone needs a battery replacement. And that's also why this phone cost me $50. So while I was using this phone, I had to carry around a power bank just for the phone to not die on me while I was outside. So in that case, I can't say anything about the battery quite yet. Now with all of that said, is it worth buying an iPhone 8 7 years after its release? Well, if you're gonna use it for low demanding tasks like texting or just web browsing and you find one for a very reasonable price, I would recommend buying one. But if you're looking to do some heavier tasks and want a better screen quality and better battery life, I would recommend going for a newer iPhone or an Android phone. Anyways, thanks for watching, see you later.